Hello, and welcome to AP Table Talk, a podcast where we explore board games and what makes them interesting to us. I'm your host, Brian, and joining me as always, my co-host, who is someone who somehow manages to be both incredibly knowledgeable and perpetually confused. It's the walking contradiction himself, Dave.
Hey, I'm back. The walking contradiction himself.
How's it going?
I'm all right. How are you?
Yeah, things are okay here. Weather's getting warmer here. Kids are outside a lot. Mm-hmm. Finally got my gaming group back together, so
nice.
We're gonna start getting some games back to the table.
Mm-hmm. Got anything good on the table right now?
Yeah, I might talk about it in this episode. Actually, I finally got to play a game I've been wanting to play, so I think it will come up in this episode. So I'll save it.
All right, let's save it then.
Okay, so this episode we will be discussing deck building, and so I'm going to refer to everything that we're talking about as deck building, but we mean deck building, bag building, pool building, anything. They're essentially the same, just using different medium.
Yep.
And so I guess I'll explain what we mean by that. So what does deck building mean? So when I think of deck building, generally a game where each player is playing. Again, I'm going to just talk about it in terms of cards because I think it's the simplest. So you're playing through, each player has a deck of cards and you're playing through that deck of cards, and throughout the game you're trying to improve those cards by adding them through some mechanism or removing them in some games, and to give you kind of the most efficient deck to use to earn whatever goal it is in the game.
Yeah, I think that is a solid definition. I think that one of those things that people forget is that while it's called deck building, sometimes there could also be unbuilding or deck destruction. But basically, coming from Board Game Geek, again, the mechanic is deck, bag, and pool building. It says that, quote, players play cards out of individual decks, seeking to acquire new cards and to play through their decks iteratively, improving them over time through card acquisition or card elimination. It may include a random draw to form a hand from the deck from the current round, as in Star Realms, and the deck is automatically reset once the draw pile is exhausted, or it may allow access to all available cards at once, as in Concordia, until the discards are retrieved. The latter may embody the action retrieval mechanic, where the card used activates actions. This category also covers bag building, pool building, and related mechanisms using chits, dice, etc. Dominion pioneered this mechanism. However, the caveat here is collectible card games where the players purchase or provide their own decks to play, such as in Magic the Gathering, is listed under deck construction. So I want to be very clear about that. We're considering Magic the Gathering, and BGG also considers Magic the Gathering as deck construction, whereas this episode and this mechanic, we're talking about deck, bag, and pool building.
Yeah, and I think we may talk about it more later, but essentially the difference to me is in deck construction, your deck is formed prior to the game, whereas in deck building, you are forming the deck throughout the game.
Yeah, I call that, it's the main action of the game. Like,
right.
The construction of it is the main mechanic of the game. You have to do it as part of the game.
Yeah, and I was also going to break a little bit from our normal format in this episode, because I am almost positive that both of us will be discussing Dominion in this episode.
Yep.
And just to give a better idea of deck building, because Dominion is the game that essentially pioneered deck building.
Yep.
And I just kind of was going to run through the general setup and loop of Dominion to give a better example of the definition of deck building. So generally in Dominion, so if you have no objections, I'm going to do that. Again, I'm sure we will talk about Dominion in this episode.
Yep. In
Dominion, I believe you start with a deck of 10 cards, and everyone has the same identical starter deck. You draw, so that becomes your draw deck. You will draw 5 cards, which will become your hand. And you play those 5 cards, and then in each round, you'll play the cards that you draw, and then that becomes a discard, and you'll draw 5 new cards, and you'll continue to do that. And as your draw deck depletes, once you go to draw and you don't have any cards left in your draw deck, you shuffle your discards and form a new draw deck. And that's the general loop of a deck builder, or at least the common deck builder. There's been evolution and some innovation in that. And those cards can be used in different ways depending on the game. And so in Dominion, I think it's generally you get money, victory points, or actions.
Yep. And buy is one of the actions.
Right. Yes, right. Again, we talked about adding and removing cards. So you start with cards that are very low value. And you want to increase those, but you kind of want to remove those low value cards because it becomes difficult to use your other cards, because as you grow your deck, you're only drawing 5 cards. So what you want to be able to get those valuable cards more often. So you want to discard, or as it's the term I think that we use is thinning your deck by trashing cards. And when we say trash, we mean as opposed to when you play a card, it is discarded into your discard pile. When you trash a card, it's out of the game. So you remove it completely from your deck, and thus leaving hopefully a more efficient deck.
Yep, I think that's a really good summary of overall, since Dominion is that has pioneered this mechanic, and like you said before, right? Like other games have iterated on this, but that's generally the gist of how a deck building game works. Yeah,
and even within Dominion, there's caveats. I mean, I don't know how many expansions Dominion's had, so there's all kinds of exceptions they've made and interesting things they've done with it, but. Stripping it down to just the bare bones of the deck building mechanics, I think that's the general gameplay loop of the deck building portion of it. Right.
Yep. Cool.
Okay, so we can get down to kind of our examples here.
Do you want to do our die roll?
Oh yeah, right. Yeah,
initiative. So if you're
my die here,
if you're listening to AP Table Talk for the first time and aren't familiar, Brian and I both have a D20, and we're going to roll it. Whoever rolls the highest is going to have initiative, and we'll lead off this section, which is, we're going to start out with major examples. So, Brian, when you're ready to roll, I'm ready to go.
Major examples. Yeah. So I am going to roll. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
All right. I got 5.
Okay. I got 10. So
right,
I will go first. So our first example is the first game that we played. Now, in this case, I did skip Dominion. Again, I think we're going to talk about it a lot. And I wanted to get some other games onto the list here, but I do believe that Dominion is probably the first deck building game I played. The only one that might have come close would be Star Realms. But I'm also not going to talk about that one. So before I continue, Dave, me and you have talked about this in the past. So I used to feel that I disliked deck builders. And over the course of our years playing board games together, I think I've turned around on that. So instead of talking about my first deck builder, I'm going to talk about the first deck building game that I kind of enjoyed.
It converted you?
Yeah, that kind of converted me. And so this goes back to a year that we were at PAX, 2017 PAX East. We actually played a few deck builders. And I liked 3 in particular come to mind. So I won't talk about all 3 of them. I'll pick one, but the 3 that we played that year was Dune, the board game.
Oh yeah.
Which is kind of a deck builder, mixed with a dungeon crawling game, kind of like Descent. Roll for the Galaxy. Again, I guess more of a pool builder. Where you're that one's the I guess the reiteration of A Race for the Galaxy. And the one that I'm actually going to talk about that I think is actually a pretty big game is the second version of the game, which I like, Clank in Space, which the original Clank, the adventure game. But yeah, Clank in Space, I like my sci-fi, and I kind of like some of the changes they made to the gameplay. Clank in Space is, I guess, a mixture of deck building, and I'm not even sure. It's almost 2 deck builders in the game.
Was Clank in Space critically different from the original Clank? Because I don't think I ever played Clank
gameplay wise, it's very much the same. But there was a few little like trolley things you can do in the original Clank that I didn't like as much. So I'll start off. So in Clank, you are using your deck building to kind of move your way through through a dungeon, or in Clank in Space through a spaceship, and you're trying to essentially loot some stuff off the spaceship and then escape to an escape pod. And in the original Clank, you're getting some loot from a dungeon and escaping the dungeon.
Yep.
In the original Clank, so the difference that I'm talking about that kind of made me like Clank in Space better, was in the original Clank, as soon as you have any treasure, you can leave the dungeon. So and then leaving the dungeon kind of triggers an end state. So if people aren't prepared for that, you can grab a piece of treasure and immediately leave the dungeon, and people are just scrambling at that point.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because you could awaken the dragon, basically. Right. Yeah.
Whereas Clank in Space, you are required to get 2 security keys that are buried in the ship in order to get to the escape pod to get out. So I think that was done probably on purpose for that reason.
Yeah.
But again, other than that, the gameplay is essentially the same, just a different theme. Again, it's your standard deck building mechanic. You have your hand, you're getting items that'll help you traverse the dungeon, fight security that's on the ship, or traverse the dungeon or the ship or whatever. And the little twist they did is on your cards, you could get, by the namesake, something called plus clanks. And every time you get a plus clank, you take a cube of your color and you put it into this clank area. I forget what it's called. I'm just going to call it the clank area. And some cards have, every time you play a card that has that, you put one of your colored cubes into this area. And then when there's a symbol that can come up on some of the cards as well. And when that symbol comes up, you take all of the cubes that are in that area and they go into a bag. And in that bag, and then you draw, as the game progresses, you draw more and more of these cards. And what it does is the clank symbolizes you making noise. So the more noise you make, but like generally there'll be more clank on more powerful cards. So you're kind of trading off. And the more noise you make, you draw from that bag. And if your color comes up, you take a hit to your health. So the more noise you make, the more chance of your cube coming out of the bag. So it's a deck builder in your cards that you hand you form, and it's kind of a bag builder in this damage bag, cube bag that gets made. Not quite a deck builder, but it does use that mechanic.
The pool, right? Because you're building
the pool builder, right?
And it kind of affects the
now that's like a joint pool, like it's almost that's the bad guys, the games bag they're drawing from when the event occurs.
Right.
So yeah, I liked that mechanic of kind of like this gambling on, it's almost like a push your luck feel. Whereas like, you can, even though you can make a bunch of noise, it doesn't necessarily mean that your cube's going to come out. You are changing the odds. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that you will get your cube chosen.
Yeah. That's true.
And it just created this interesting kind of gamble of like how much you want to push, what do you want to take, the noisier cards or the safer cards, and things like that. And I really enjoyed that. The theme really clicked for me as well. And so that one is when I started to realize like, hey, maybe I do like deck builders. And again, I'll probably talk more about my kind of conversion on deck builders as we go. But I would say that is the first one where I kind of realized that, hey, maybe I don't dislike deck builders as much as I thought I did.
Right. All it took was a thematic change,
some theme and some innovation to the kind of the core Dominion loop. I will talk about Dominion later in our episode here. So.
Right. Cool.
All right, you can go ahead. Sorry, that was a little long-winded section for me, but
no, I'm glad that you got Dominion out of the way because I was going to see how long we can go without mentioning Dominion.
I think Dominion's going to come up a lot. So,
right. I mean, it pioneered the mechanics.
It's hard to not talk about Dominion when you talk about deck builders. So,
right. So for me, most noteworthy, again, Dominion was the first.
Sorry, are you doing most noteworthy or are you doing first game played?
I am doing biggest, most noteworthy first? Did you do first?
Oh, I did first game played, but I did first game that kind of turned me on to deck builders.
Oh, I see. Okay. So for me, technically the first one was Dominion, but we're talking about that a lot. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to augment this.
Okay.
I'm going to change it to the first solo deck builder I played, which is a game called Friday by Friedman Fries.
Okay.
Friedman Fries is probably best known for his design of power plants, power grid.
Power grid. Yeah.
Power grid. He also designed this solo deck building game called Friday, which I played when I first started getting into game space learning. I used it as a sort of interview for some of my student staff. I had them play a solo game of Friday, and I was just kind of evaluating how they played it, how they made decisions, etc. I didn't really know about game space learning at the time. But one, I thought it was interesting because one, I didn't really know a lot about solo games.
Friday is the solo only game, right? I think you've recommended it to me. I've never actually had a chance to try it, but
yeah,
that's the solo only one. Yeah. Okay.
Where basically you're playing as Friday, who's trying to survive on this island, and he has to, like protect himself from the elements, protect himself from pirates or other people, and like animals, and like not die basically. So Friday was the first solo deck builder I played. Dominion was the first, official deck builder I played. That's it for me.
So we'll move on to our favorite deck building games.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I did list two here. So my favorite, deck building game, I think I would say probably by a lot, is a newer game. And it's Dune Imperium. Now I think it has been argued on if it's a deck building game or a worker placement game. And I feel it's as strong one as it is the other. It kind of relies, each element relies on the other.
Yep.
So it's a good mix of the two. I mentioned I got a game to the table, my last session. I was finally able to play, Dune Imperium Uprising, which is I guess the second iteration of the game, where they've, more based on the second movie as opposed to the first movie.
Yeah.
And they incorporated a lot of the fixes that they had put in through expansions in the original Dune Imperium. But anyways, so in Dune Imperium, yes, it's a kind of a mashup of deck building and worker placement. So in Dune Imperium, again, you have your standard setup. Everyone has the same starter deck. You draw your 5, and you're able to use resources to buy from the market to increase your deck, or there are spaces that allow you to trash cards. And the way that they've innovated on deck building is that most of the cards so they're multi-use cards, and the cards all have some iconography on the one side, which you are, on your turn, you play a card, and they each have these symbols which allow you to go to certain spaces on the board. So that's the worker placement element. And they also have a section for if you use the card to place a worker, there's possibly actions in addition to that from that card. But now each person starts with 2 workers. You can get a third worker in the game. So you draw your 5. So you generally will have extra cards left after your workers are placed. So once everyone has placed once you've placed all your workers, you do what's called a reveal phase, and you actually use the remainder of your cards. And they have a second section at the bottom of the card where the cards are worth some type of value when they're not used. So that will generally be a combat value, or I forget what the term they use, but essentially the currency for buying more cards. I don't remember if it was influence or something like that.
It's not Solari, right? Because that's the currency in the game.
So there is an actual like currency in the game, but there is a currency used to purchase more cards. And I think it's influence, maybe. I can't remember. I know what the symbol looks like, but that doesn't help on a podcast. So
it's been a while since I played it, so I wish I could tell you, but I thought it was Solari, but
Solari is the actual money, but that's not what you use to buy cards.
Yeah, no, I thought Solari was what you used to buy cards.
Right. Solari, there's 3 of traditional type of resources in the game. So it's the Solari, the spice, and the water.
Yep.
but then there's also, I think it's influence, but it's one that does not carry over. You only use it that round in order to purchase more cards.
I see.
And yeah, when that game, so the Dune Imperium came out in 2020. I think it was supposed to coincide with the movie, and the movie got delayed, so it ended up coming out before the movie. But I know it was talked about quite a bit. And I think it's still up there in the BGG list. I know a lot of people enjoy that one a lot, but yeah, it has everything I liked. It does have a combat element to it. You're putting troops out. So it has that direct conflict. The board is pretty tight. So there's a lot of interaction in even where you're playing your agents or your workers and whatnot. So that definitely, not just my favorite deck builder, but probably one of my favorite games, top 3 for sure. So that is definitely my favorite game.
Nice.
I do have a second, but why don't you go ahead and then I will kind of mention my other one briefly.
Right. I have 2.
Okay, you have 2 as well. Perfect.
There's a favorite and it's like a runner-up. So yeah,
okay,
I'll do my favorite and runner-up, and we'll go into your runner-up. So my favorite is actually a bag builder, and I think I talked to you about this before. It's a game called Altiplano, which we played at PAX a number of years ago when I was still new to the hobby and I still didn't know what was going on. Altiplano is a bag building game. It's kind of the spiritual successor to Orleans, where you're putting different, they call it chits, CHITS, into a bag, cardboard chits. And then when you pull them out of your bag, similar to like a deck, and then you can pull out so many chits based on, how far up you progressed on on a place on the board called the road. And then you assign those chits to different places on the board, and then you resolve actions on those places. So similar to what you said, Brian, about Dune Imperium, where you could have chits to resolve for a location, but you also need to be at that location in order to resolve it. So I'd say Altiplano. In my group, I have Altiplano. My friend of mine has Orleans, and we've played both of them, but still my favorite is Altiplano. It's rather dry. The last time I got on the table was a few weeks ago, and I just discovered, based on my objective and where I was on the map, I'm just going to spend the next 10 turns going back and forth, turning this into this so I can get victory points to win, this particular objective. But despite that, I'd still like Altiplano because it's a game based in Peru, which is a country I visited a number of years ago. I really loved it. And I hiked the trail to Machu Picchu, and the group I hiked with gave me a little Machu Picchu shot glass, which is what I use now for the first player token in the game.
Oh, so nice.
My number 1 is going to be Altiplano. My number 2, which is my runner up, and then I'll go to you, Bri.
Yeah,
is
go ahead.
It is considered a bag building game, but I really consider it a push your luck game. And similar to you, Bri, I did not like push your luck games until I played this game, which turned me onto it, which is the Quacks of Quedlinburg.
Oh, you know what? I was going to guess it because I know you like that game.
Oh, yeah.
And I kind of forgot about it as a bag building game until I was thinking about, because I kind of think about what I think you're going to put on your lists, and kind of in case I think we're going to have too many duplicates, so I try to have another one ready. But I was like, oh, I remembered you liked that one when I got to this point. I was going to guess this. I thought this was going to be your favorite, actually.
Oh, really? Quacks? No, I mean, I like Altiplano a lot, despite the fact that it's really dry. But I think we don't
Quacks. Talk about Altiplano as much.
Oh, yeah.
I do remember playing the game. I don't remember the details, but I remember enjoying that game when we played it.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically it's bag building, resource conversion. I didn't like the fact that I was doing the same thing for 10 turns because that was the most efficient way to gain points.
Right.
But I really like Quacks because there's that whole aspect of, should I keep pulling from my bag or do I have the chance to explode? And despite the fact that I probably will explode, I will still take, potions in the bag. And that is what really made me really like, Quacks, even if it's a bag building / push your luck game. But that is my honorable mention. My number 1 is Altiplano. Honorable mention is Quacks of Quedlinburg. What about you, Brian?
I like Quacks as well. And I think I generally do like push your luck as a mechanic.
Yep.
It's always just an element in the games that me and my brother would kind of create. It's just it's that whole no guts, no glory, just keep going.
Yeah.
That's why even games like Can't Stop, very simple, but I kind of like it. It doesn't mean I'm good at it because I won't. So I'll just keep going.
Keep pushing. Yeah.
Yep. But all right. So The second one I wanted to put on my favorites because I had Dune Imperium in there, which is kind of like a dual mechanic one. So more closer to a pure, I guess in this case, a pure bag builder is one. I don't think you like this one as much, but I really clicked with this one when we played another one we played at PAX together, and it's War Chest.
Oh, yeah.
I think we're actually playing it right now on Board Game Arena.
Yep.
So in War Chest, you're choosing your troop types, and they are represented by poker chips. I think there's 4 or 5 of them, and you start with 2 of each of them in your bag. Each round each turn you draw 3 chips, and each one allows you to do certain actions with that chip. The actions are you can use the chip to move that unit. You can use the chip to place. You can use that actual chip and physically put it onto the board if you to add that unit to the board. And sorry, I should mention the goal is there are a number of spaces on the board. It's like a hex board. There's a number of spaces where you are trying to maneuver, and there are forts, and you're trying to take the forts. So it's an area control, I guess, game. So yeah, you can place a unit on a fort that you own. You can use, if the unit's already out there, you can use a chip to move the unit. Or you can also place the chip on, if the unit's already out there, you can I think it's called reinforce, where you add the chip to the, and stack it on the other one. And that allows it to basically allow it to take a hit without dying. And then each unit has different movement and different like special attack and whatever. Like, I think cavalry can move and attack once or move twice. I can't remember what it is, but they all have some, like they're asymmetric units. So you're trying to figure out the combo. And what I found very interesting was that decision between, do I want to use the chip? If you use the chip to reinforce and make your unit stronger, it means that you have less of those chips to draw from the bag. So that means that unit will come up less. You'll be able to use the unit less, like statistically. And sorry, the other, you can also discard a chip to take another chip and put it and add it to your bag. So that is the bag building part of it.
Right. Yeah, we're playing that on Board Game Arena, and I kind of shot myself in the foot because I think 4 chips per unit.
You used all of them in one of them, and then now you can't draw that unit anymore.
Yeah, and I was like, I had to keep passing every turn now because I can't move this unit anymore. It's a super unit,
and I think we've made that mistake when we were first playing it too, and that's when it kind of clicked. It's like, you have to balance off because there's a limited number of the chips, because when you attack a unit and that chip comes off, it's out of the game. So you only have so many. Like it's a relatively short game. Once you kind of know the rules.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's first to 6. You're trying to capture 6 forts first or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I just found that very interesting. It has a few expansions, which essentially just gives you more units. And I like to play with drafting the units. So you get 4 different units, and that becomes you take your 2 of each, and the rest become like where you can add to your bag if you want to use it your turn that way. And again, it's only 3 chips a turn, so it moves pretty quickly. The rules are relatively simple. So yeah, I really enjoy that one. I guess it's kind of an abstract.
Yeah, which is not necessarily bad, but I think that it's just elegantly designed. Yeah. Yeah,
and the poker chips, I mean, they're not high-end poker chip, but they have a nice feel to play that type of game with as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that was also up there as one of my favorites. I wouldn't put it higher than Dune Imperium for sure, but it's kind of more of a pure deck builder.
Right. All right.
All right.
We go into our next section.
We'll move on to the most noteworthy or the biggest game.
Yeah.
So we've already talked about Dominion, and it's hard to really say that anything is more noteworthy in deck building. So what I decided I would do instead. So again, I talked about how I didn't really like deck building. And I will say that Dominion is one of the games that kind of started me on that. Oh, okay. Well, this is deck building. I don't really like it. Now that is not to say that I think Dominion is a bad game. It just doesn't work for me. all the evidence shows that Dominion is a great game because people love that game.
Yeah.
So I kind of tried to look into why I don't like Dominion. And I compared it to, because I as much as I talked about Star Realms very briefly, and I did like Star Realms a little better. So I kind of compared it. It's not one of my favorites, but I kind of just compared it and thought about why I like Star Realms better, because I would consider them both pure deck builders, and they're both early in deck building kind of evolution. So some of the elements that I found that just didn't click with me was, I found that in Dominion, even though we've talked about other pure bag builders, it kind of became very formulaic. Once you kind of figure out the combo you want, you're just repeating that. It felt like to me. So again, it made the game almost very front loaded. You're making all your decisions early.
Yeah.
And those early decisions that you make and whether you're able to do them, if you had a better understanding of that game state of the combination of cards that were out there, if all the players are equal, it's kind of a coin flip as whoever can pull off the first cards first, and then you're just going through the motions after that.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of reminds me of Altiplano, right? Where I discovered, I just have to go between these two places to churn these items into victory points.
Right.
Which, and it could be some people's, like that's their jam. That's what they want to do.
Yeah, exactly. Like, again, I don't think it's a bad game by any means. It just didn't click for me. And I don't know if it was just, I do find it a bit dry thematically as well. Yeah, I don't know. It never clicked with me. And even through all the expansion, not that I've played all the expansions, but I know I've seen cards that sound interesting to me.
Yeah.
But it kind of ended there. It's like, okay, that's an interesting card, but it didn't really turn me around to the game. I always just kind of had a bad taste in my mouth on that game since I originally played it.
Right.
Whereas I found with something like Star Realms, it felt a little more strategic. There was more variety kind of in the cards. I mean, it doesn't technically have more variety, but it just felt that way in the game. And I mean, they're both kind of lacking in player interaction, I think is what I felt as well, which is something that I think that both Dune and War Chests have plenty of.
Right. Yeah.
As they're kind of direct conflict games. And also just the pacing, I think, of Dominion. I mean, I guess if you're playing with people who play, it goes quickly, but because it felt monotonous to me, maybe it just felt slow to me.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my delve into like why it never clicked for me.
So for my most noteworthy and biggest one, like you, I think it's really hard to talk about this mechanic without also mentioning Dominion. So technically it is my first, it is my most noteworthy. The other ones I had on the list here was, I talked about Quacks because that was my run-up for favorite. I think that's what turned me on to back building and, push your luck games. I also had Clank on here because I thought that was one of the first times when I saw deck building really mashed up with a different mechanic, like point-to-point movement on the map and all of that. So it wasn't just to build your deck. It was to build your deck, to move around the map, to gather things like get points. And then there was the whole thing with the bag and the dragon and all that.
Yeah, and I think Clank did get really popular because it has like Acquisitions Incorporated version, like legacy versions, and a bunch of expansions. So I think it did click with a lot of people.
Yeah. But for me, I'm going to have to go with the biggest, most noteworthy is going to be Dominion, because the first time I played it, I remember it was truly like I was trying to learn a new game for the first time. And it was like when I was learning how to play trick-taking games, like with spades, like I had to create the pathway in my head for how you play this game. And Dominion, it was like completely different from anything I'd ever played. I had to relearn how to play this game from the ground up. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to really say that anything could be more noteworthy than it at this point, because it's a relatively newer mechanic. Like if you were to compare it to like trick taking, for example, that's been around for ages. One that kind of just came to mind thinking about Dune, the same year that Dune Imperium came out.
Yeah.
There was another game that people liked to compare, although I did feel they felt very different to me. I understand why the comparison was there, was Lost Ruins of Arnak. And that was another one that people really enjoy that one. And I think the difference in the people that liked one over the other is, I mean, I thought Dune Imperium was far superior. Well, maybe not far superior, but I definitely preferred a lot more was the player conflict. Lost Ruins of Arnak, I don't think has any other than because it has the same mix, which is where the comparison comes of worker placement and deck building. But I don't think other than like interfering, like indirect,
you just draft against
conflict.
other players.
Yeah, there's not really this like, there's not really any take that in it. Which, as we've discussed in many episodes,
you have to have that take back. Yeah, it's not fun unless you're making someone else lose.
So yeah, that was just another one that came to mind. That it was another one that was very popular. But I think that in the long run, I definitely hear more about Dune Imperium than I do about Lost Ruins now.
Right.
All right. So I think that wraps up our major examples.
Yeah, that we covered all three there. Should we go into our next
move on to our
section?
Beyond the Basics? Sure.
Yeah, so for Beyond the Basics, we're going to do what we did before. We're going to roll our D20 to see who's going to lead off on this section. So Brian, ready to roll when you are?
Yep. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
All right, I have 11.
Okay, I got 5. So
all right, I will lead off.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're going to start off here, according to my notes, with integration on theme. And the questions that we're going to lead off this section with is the mechanic flexible enough to fit different themes, game worlds, and stories? And then the follow-up question, can it help create a cohesive and immersive experience? So my opinion is that I can't say that there's a huge integration in theme with most of these games because, again, like the most important and I think the most interesting decision here is how you build your deck, how you cull or thin your deck, and then how you play with your deck throughout the game. So I can't really think about like a lot of other, analogies to other things that the game's theme might be connected to. So it's really up to the designer to connect them. However, if I went through my list, I was considering of deck, bag, and pool building games, and I think that these are the ones that are closest to theme for me. Number 1 would be Arctic Scavengers, and that's a game we played on Board Game Arena. That's another game that has a lot of expansions, not as much as Dominion, but the overall theme for Arctic Scavengers is that you're playing as a band of survivors in this Arctic wasteland, and you're trying to build a deck that allows you to scavenge for supplies, find other survivors, fight other bands of survivors. So I like that game. I got a hard copy. I haven't played my hard copy yet, but I played a lot of it on Board Game Arena. But I like the fact that like it's the thematic connection for me is that you are playing in this Arctic wasteland and it is like no holds barred, and you just have to you may not always win every quote unquote round, but you just try to do the best what you can. So I think the thematic connection for me is the actual scavenging component, which is the part of the title for Arctic Scavengers.
Right.
What about you, Bri, on integration with theme?
So yeah, I mean, I think I agree with most of what you said. I think it is, not that it can't be done, but it is one, when you're talking specifically about the deck building mechanic, it's one that's a little more difficult to tie it directly to a theme. We talked about Clank, and that is one where I like the way they integrated kind of the noise into the value of items that you get and integrated that into kind of the deck building portion of it in order to create that tension. And another one that kind of is a similar idea is a game that I really enjoy, which is Heat. And that is one where, again, you are, so the namesake card in that is heat, and you have a certain amount of heat in your deck, and you're not necessarily wanting to get rid of it out of your engine, but it's a resource that you have to strategically have it either in your engine or out of your engine in order to use it the best. So in a lot of deck builders, you have these cards that clog up your deck. So for example, I think in Dominion, it was Curses.
Yeah, Curses.
Yeah,
Curses,
I think it was Curses.
One of them at least. Yeah.
I think Lost Ruins of Arnak also had Curses. But essentially they're cards that either are detrimental or do nothing, so that when you draw, you essentially wasting your hand.
Yeah,
so Heat,
you could only draw a limited number of cards.
Right. Heat kind of serves that role in the Heat cards, serves that role in the Heat game. Where you need to have Heat kind of in your, what they call the engine pile. And then certain maneuvers can spend that heat and put it into your deck where you draw it. And then you have to try and have cards that can get it back in. And if you're unable to do that, you take, in certain cases, or if you are doing certain maneuvers, you're taking also stress cards. And I like the way they did stress cards. So one of the mechanics or one of the rules, I guess, in Heat is that as you take turns, there is a speed value. So you're flipping cards over that have some certain numbers on them, and you need to decide how fast, and that's essentially how many spaces you're going to go. And certain turns, okay, so it's like you can't go more than 6 spaces around this turn because, again, whether it's a sharp turn or a slower turn or whatever, and that's kind of to give you that theme. And you can push faster than that rating at the cost of heat.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that certain maneuvers add stress to your deck, and when you play stress cards, once you reveal the numbers that you have, including your stress cards, you have to draw cards from your deck unknown until you get another speed. So you know that your cards are generally 1 to 4. So you can gamble and say, okay, well, I'm playing 4 and a stress card to go around the 6th turn.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of can try and remember how many cards are in your deck. Do you have a lot of 1s and 2s left? So I found that gave me that tension that kind of felt like it was tying in with the theme of this race of Formula One racing kind of thing.
Yeah.
Neat.
It was like, I think it's a really good game. I don't know if it's the one that I would play. We'll talk about a different one later, but I appreciate the design though. I think that's one of the things that I really like about Heat in general. That and the fact that it's like, a really sought after game.
Have you played that one in person or only on BGA with me?
I haven't had a chance to play it in person. No.
I think that playing it with that game works well with a large group because a lot of the turn can be done simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that game shines at like 6 or 7 people even. Because you start to really get a crowded track and people are like drafting and there's a lot of like cheering and like and stuff like that, and spin outs happen in the turns and stuff. Yeah. And I think that really helps the enjoyment of that game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I would say like, I don't think I'll play it too much on Board Game Arena, but playing it in person with a bunch of people is really fun.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move on to depth and strategy.
Yeah. So I'm leading off on this one.
Sure.
All right. So for this one on depth and strategic options, we're considering the following questions. Does the mechanic offer meaningful choices and decisions for players? Does it create interesting decisions and trade-offs? Is there room for different strategies to emerge and compete? And mechanics that's too simple can be repetitive, while one that's overly complex might be daunting to newcomers. So I will be hopefully the first one to say it. I think that deck, bag, and pool building, it has a lot of depth for this mechanic. And I say that because if you've played it enough, you kind of know what cards or chits or dice or whatever you need to get. And then there's that whole, I think, very strategic element about how and when to cull your pool. So, remove cards from your deck, remove chits from your bag, remove, other components from the pool, etc. And then what I like about that is that you are only playing with the changes in the frequency in which things that can come up. You can never really decide that, like, okay, on the next turn, these cards are going to come up. You just know that by doing this, by buying new cards, by removing some cards or chits or anything else, you can just make it so that your next turn or future turn is going to be a little bit better than what's happening right now. And I think that offers a lot of really great decision space.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's an interesting balance too in some games when you know the cards, like it creates that learning curve for a new player if they don't know the cards. But you could also, if your market, your variety of cards is so large, that can kind of balance that off a bit because you might know the cards, but those cards may never even come up this game. And again, I'll think of games like Clank has a huge bank of cards. So as long as you know like the possibilities, I guess, of what types of cards can come up, it kind of evens the playing field there a little bit. But the other side of that, knowing when you need to add or when you need to thin, I think the term in Dominion is when to start going green.
Yeah.
And that term is in Dominion, the green cards are the victory points.
Yep.
So while it's how you win the game, but it's also they also don't do anything for you.
Mhm.
So they clog your deck, but you need them to win. Also, I think it's one of the what's one of the end game conditions is to buy up all the like 6-point cards or something like that.
Yeah, that's the strategy I always gone to.
Generally, the way the games end, once people have played the game a few times, that's generally, you get to the point where it's like, okay, now you're just buying as many of the 6-point cards as you can so that you can end the game.
Yeah. The strategy is the big money strategy. You read about that one?
No, I don't think, or at least I don't remember.
Big money is where you're just spending your turns to get the biggest money cards you can get, so that you can trade those biggest money cards for the biggest point cards, and that's all you do on your turn.
Right, exactly. And so it's that knowing the game well enough to know when do you switch over, when do you make that switch from buying cards that are more utility into cards that will help you win the game.
Yep.
And different games have different things that kind of muddy the water a little bit there.
Yeah.
So.
And then I had some games I didn't mention here, Bri, but did you have any games that you wanted to mention for?
So I mean, I will bring
options?
I already spoke about it, so I'll just note it again here. Like one of my favorite kind of decisions that I really enjoyed is in War Chest, that kind of decision of strengthening a unit versus or strengthening the unit at the cost of decreasing how many times you can use that unit.
Yeah.
I always thought that was a really interesting decision space.
For me, and I think that War Chest is really good at reducing that into a strategic choice that's relatively elegantly placed. But I think that some of the heavier games that include some depth and strategic options that also include deck building, Great Western Trail is one of them.
Oh, that's right. I kind of forgot about that one.
Yeah, it has a lot of because again, you're like deck building is only part of the game. Like you're also resolving those cards to take actions in the game. And then, and I don't know if you consider this, Brad, because we played it on BJ a lot, was Obsession. You remember Obsession?
Oh, the Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah,
game.
where you are building a deck of cards in Jane Austen Pride and Prejudice kind of era. Again, it's not. I wouldn't say it's the main mechanic, but it's one of the ways in which you get victory points and progress throughout the game. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I joke about that game, but I actually really like that game a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so shall we move on to balance and fairness?
And
okay.
I'll
do you want to keep going? Do you want me to lead, or doesn't matter?
Why don't you lead off on this one?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So when we're talking again about the deck building mechanic, I think when you have that element of randomness, when you draw a random draw, there's always going to be the possibility that you're going to draw a bad hand or whatever. But I feel what deck building excels at with randomness is at least allowing you to feel like you have some control in mitigating that as you sculpt your deck. And I think that's why it doesn't feel as random as it might be, because you do have control in, okay, well, I'm going to get rid of these cards. I'm going to add more of these cards in and allow you to kind of sculpt those chances. But it's definitely, I mean, there's definitely randomness, which is always going to play with the balance and fairness, but I never feel like it never feels that unfair.
Yeah.
When you draw a bad hand, especially in games that can do it well. And one of the things I think that, something that uses, I'll use Dune again, because those cards are multi-use. If the situation comes up and the card is not useful as an activation card, then using it in the reveal phase might be useful. Mm-hmm. So you kind of even have more opportunities to mitigate drawing cards that you didn't need at the time. Yep. So I would say, again, randomness is never going to be perfectly balanced, but it doesn't feel that way in deck builders to me.
Yeah, that's true. I think that because it's random, you're never going to get a quote unquote fair draw. I think the most fair you can get is like with Dominion, when you start at the very beginning, everyone's got the same 10 cards.
Right.
And you're going to get a random combination of 5 of those 10 cards.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think what is appealing about deck, bag, and pool building games is that the randomness is based on input, which means you're going to get a random number of cards that come into your hand or into your pool or whatever you're building, but the output is not random. Like you can choose how and when to use those cards to accomplish X, Y, and Z in the game. So I think that's an important consideration, because Like an example of output randomness is whenever you, like for Monopoly, you roll two d6s and then you got to move those spaces. You don't have any other choice. But with input randomness, like with deck builders, you're going to get a random number of cards based on how you've constructed your deck, and then you get to choose how you use it. And I think that a really good way I would summarize it is that deck building games and some other games, they can be both high luck and high skill, and that's okay. Like I think those are actually some of the most engaging games that people still play nowadays.
Yeah, like I mean, people argue, Euro versus Ameritrash, and I don't think generally favor pure Euro game. Like I like a little bit of chaos, a little bit of luck.
Yeah.
As long as I feel like I can mitigate it somehow, or at least push things into my favor some more. It just creates more interesting situations, I think.
Yeah.
All right. Player engagement and fun.
Yeah. I'll lead off this one.
Sure. Go ahead.
All right, so for player engagement and fun, we're considering, does the mechanic create interesting and engaging moments for players? Does it lead to exciting turns and dramatic reveals and satisfying payoffs? Is it enjoyable to interact with and learn? And even the most strategic mechanic can fall flat if it is not fun to play. So I do think it is incredibly fun to play when you get the right pull, draw, or take. Like I used Quacks of Quedlinburg before. I think that when you think you're going to explode, but you don't, it's a really great feeling. And that's one of the reasons I really like that game. I think that there's a really fun cerebral aspect of building your bag or the deck the way that you want it to be and you need it to be. And it's also really fun when you get the draw to come out based on, like the work that you put into it. And some examples I like is we're playing automobiles right now on Board Game Arena, which is a bag building game, Quacks and Quedlinburg. And I really like that game of After Us we played on Board Game Arena because it combines deck building, but also tableau building. So you're going to draw those cards, but you get to arrange how those cards fit in your tableau so that you can generate some resources for the game. So I think that this is probably one of the most engaging and fun mechanics that I know of.
Yeah, I agree. That good feeling of being able to pull off some combo that you planned as you were, picking out those cards that you want to add to your deck. And it's like, oh, I remember I had this other card and some card comes on the market. It's like, oh, if I can get these two cards together, then I'll be able to do this and then this. And like just being able to successfully do that is fantastic. You mentioned automobiles. And again, I mean, Heat, I think, has the same feeling of just like, oh, when the right cards come up at the right time, it's great. And a game, I don't know if you've played a game that automobiles, it kind of reminded me of, I've only played it once and I've actually been looking for it because I think it'd be a good one to play with my kids. Have you ever played Cubitos?
Yes, I have. Yep.
Yeah. So another racing game. So in that one, there are different colored dice that have varying like faces and number of symbols that are on each different face. And in each game, I guess you randomly pick the powers that each of the different colors have. And you are moving through this kind of almost freeform race board and collecting coins to get more dice to add. And I mean, again, I like it because it adds in also the push your luck because you get to roll the dice. I think you pick like 7 dice or something like that. I can't remember what the number is, but you pick 7 dice or something, you roll them, and every time a face comes up, you put it into your active area, and you can continue to roll. And as long as you don't, whatever dice are remaining, as long as you don't roll all blanks, you can just continue to roll. It's not even Yahtzee rolls. You can just roll and roll. But if you ever roll all blanks in the dice you rolled, then you bust and you're at.
Yep.
And I think they give you a reward not a reward, but a compensation when you bust too. So even that, it's like, okay, well, you push your luck, but at least you move up on this other thing that I think it can increase your hand size and things like this.
Yeah.
And that's another one where it's like, it just feels good when you can keep getting those rolls and you have the different dice give you different powers and how they move and getting at the right time. It's just fun. Like, it's just really fun.
I played Cubitos a few times. It wasn't really the game for me, but I do appreciate that whole like, you're building your pool of dice essentially, and you don't want to roll blanks. Okay,
and we'll move on to variety and replayability.
You want to lead off on this one?
Sure. I don't know much to this, but I will say, because you are creating this deck with however many different types of cards, it just creates a huge variability, which to me adds just almost like an immense amount of replayability as far as combinations of cards that you can go and how you build your hand. Because it's generally very situational onto what comes up in the market, or in Dominion, which cards you choose to play with as your market. I feel like it just gives you limitless options and directions you can go to build the strategy that you want, or towards whatever gameplay style you prefer, or whatever it is.
And I think that you mentioned it before, but I actually put it in this category for variety and replayability, is that the elegance of choice. And your favorite game was War Chess, and I listed here as variety and replayability, because once you know what you can do when you pull these chips from the bag, it's like, oh, okay. Well, then, like, really the change is just what chips are in the bag based on what units you're ever going to play with in the game.
Right.
So I ranked variety and replayability high with like War Chest and Star Realms, because Star Realms is a 2-player game. There's only, like so many cards that you can put in your deck and, play with during your game. And I think that it has a lot of the positives of Dominion, but it doesn't have any of the negatives with like downtime in between.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to innovation and originality.
Yeah. I will lead off.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So this one we're considering, does the mechanic offer something new and interesting, or is it just a rehash of existing ideas? Because there's a game that pioneered it, Dominion, I think that it's considered new, although I would argue that every game mechanic has been new at some point when the first game used it. But I think that this one is relatively innovative. There's still new games that are coming out that use the mechanic in different ways. I like to see some innovation when different game mechanics are mashed together. So specifically, Bri, you talked about Dune Imperium, which I really like because it mashes up deck building with also worker placement, which are two really popular mechanics. So I like that combination, and I think that another honorable mention out here goes to games like Hardback, because Hardback is a deck building game. It's also a word game. Yeah, we played that on Board Game Arena too. So like, if you like word games, if you like deck building games, Hardback or its predecessor Paperback are good options to consider.
Yeah, Paperback was, because I'm not big on, well, I mean, I guess when you say word games, most people think of Scrabble. And then my brother and my sister-in-law got really into bananagrams for a bit, but neither of them really click with me. I'm not the greatest. My vocabulary is not fantastic.
Your mom plays a lot of Boggle.
Too. But
word game.
When Paperback came, I think that ability to essentially make letters wild, you're really only looking at 5-letter words at most, kind of thing. I enjoyed it much more than I had any previous like word game that I had played.
Right.
Yeah, I agree though that a lot of the innovation that we see that I think I enjoy is kind of using Deck Builder with another mechanic. I think one that I guess I was going to talk about it a little bit in the bonus round, but we can touch on it here, is like a mechanic that's very close to deck building would be hand management. I would say something like Century Spice Road. I would argue is both. I think that some people might argue whether that's deck building game or not, but I still would classify it a deck building game because you're still adding cards to your deck throughout the game. But because it strays from the Dominion style drawing your hand and playing it, whereas you have access to your whole hand, and it's more hand management in the sense that you're choosing the order. But again, you are still building that deck. And there's another game, Concordia. Concordia does that as well, right?
Yeah.
Where you're building the hand, you're playing it, and then you use that kind of action retrieval mechanic.
Yeah, to bring them all back to you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Expeditions is another one that does that.
Oh, I haven't played that yet.
So that's the sequel to both of our top games, Scythe.
Yep.
So that's another one where so that one innovates a little bit in that your hand, not only do you have access to your hand is open knowledge. And actually it's innovative. It's also one of my few criticisms of that game is the terminology. So in that game, you have what they call your hand, but it's open and it's beside your kind of like your player mat. And it's very confusing I really dislike when designers use a term that is very like established.
Yeah.
And use it for something else. And I think that is, if I were going to criticize something in Expeditions, is that the fact that they called it the hand, but it's not, you're not holding it.
Yeah.
It's on the table. I think it's very confusing, especially if teaching to like non-gamers, because they maybe already have generally people have played cards and they know what a hand is.
Right.
So they're already learning something new, and now you're changing terminology on them. So I feel like they could have called it like supply or something else.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, you have access to that. You're moving cards from your hand into your active area, which is on the right side of your player mat.
Yeah.
But throughout the game, you're acquiring more cards to put into your hand.
Right.
And again, so I would call it deck building, but very, very different. I could see people arguing whether or not that is deck building or not.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that in my bonus round question, but you've just defined it. Well, so there you go.
Why don't we move to that now then? Unless you have anything else to talk about with innovation.
No, I covered all of that. So we're in our bonus round now.
Yeah. So go ahead and whatever we can formalize your question here.
Sure. So my question was going to be Century Spice Road for you. Is that a deck building game for you? And I would say that on BGG, it is listed as a deck building game because technically you are building a deck. But the definition, according to BGG, is like Concordia, where you can build a deck, you can build a hand of cards basically, but you can choose when to play them and when to use them, which I think is significantly different if you're comparing it to like Dominion, because in Dominion you're getting that randomizer, right? But the randomization is that you don't know when they'll come out, whereas in games like Century Spice Road, what's really randomized is the auction of cards when they come out. Because you don't know if a card will come out or when it'll come out into an order which you could potentially afford it based on what spices you have.
So I guess when we defined it, to me, the most important factor when I consider what is a deck building game is, do you construct your deck during gameplay? Yeah. And that's why I would call Century Spice Road a deck builder. Whereas I don't necessarily group in the mechanic or the part of the mechanic where you draw and how you play them. That can vary to me. As long as you are constructing the deck during gameplay, I consider it a deck builder.
Okay.
And I don't know if that is necessary. I'm just saying that's how I would define it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like with any definition, right? You have to define limits for what falls within it. Because my second question was going to be, like the definition that we're pulling from here is deck, bag, and pool building. So I wanted to jump deeper into what was meant by pool. And I want to know what you thought about this, Bri. I have a game that I have in my collection that I've kept because I think it's rather unique, called Richard the Lionheart.
Okay.
And in Richard the Lionheart, you're playing in generally teams, but you have an allegiance to the theme of the game is you're playing as England and King Richard, or you're playing for like the Sheriff of Nottingham. And you have different motivations. Like if you're playing for the Sheriff of Nottingham, you want King Richard to die in the Crusades. If you're playing as King Richard, you want him to succeed. But as the game goes on, you're building a pool of cards in order to affect the outcome of the Crusades that's happening in the Middle East.
Right.
And as you build it, you are you take worker spots and actions in order to put cards into the deck. That deck gets shuffled, and then at the end of each round, you draw X number of cards, and then the balance of those cards determine like if King Richard is winning or losing in the Crusades battle. So that is what I defined as pool, but I don't know if you consider that as part of the pool building mechanic.
Is this a common pool of cards then?
It's a common pool of cards.
And so people are adding or removing cards, or just adding, or
just adding.
I mean, it doesn't matter, but everybody has the opportunity to add to this pool.
If they can resolve an action on an appropriate worker space, they can add cards to the pool.
Again, if we're going strictly by what I think, I would consider that's almost like the second deck building that I called in Clank, where you're taking those Clank cubes and they go into the bag for the enemy.
Yeah.
It's another deck building or bag building element in this case within a deck building game. Yeah. I would say, that is pool building, or again, I just call everything deck building, but it's the same idea. It's just different pieces.
Right. Because then I feel like, if you consider games with social deduction like The Resistance, right, where you're building a deck of cards based on what you want the outcome to be for a particular like mission. Because again, if you're on the red team, you want the mission to fail, but if you're on the good team, you want the mission to succeed, and you can throw cards into the common pool to affect the outcome there. I don't know if people would I don't know if you would bill like The Resistance as a deck building game, but it does have that component, right, where you're throwing cards into that common pool.
Now, okay, so now I'm trying to push my definition out to the extreme. Now that so maybe the caveat then is that while you can add and remove, like construct your deck during the game, what you do with that deck is essentially there has to be actions involved with playing those cards. So if you are creating a deck that is just a tally essentially. So I'm thinking of, again, like something like Battlestar Galactica. Everyone throws in their cards because you need a certain number of blue and a certain number of yellow.
Yeah.
Yes, everyone's throwing in to create that deck, but that deck isn't actually, the cards in that deck are not performing any actions. It's just a tally.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a vote. That's essentially just voting to me. So I wouldn't consider that portion deck building because the construction of that deck is not being used for any actions. Yeah. Like the individual cards are not being used for actions. Like, yes, the outcome might be an action, but the cards themselves are not being used for like resources or taking an action or whatnot. Yeah. Whereas like even in Century Spice Road, like, yes, you have access to them all. They're not random. When you pull them, you construct them, but each one is your trades or your upgrades to your cubes or whatever.
Right. Yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable, but I think that, like when we're considering the entire mechanic as a whole, those are those like edge cases that
absolutely
fit into it, but may not be like part of like the popular zeitgeist, right?
Exactly. Like I would think that there were definitely, I'm sure that people would argue whether, okay, sorry, I'm not sure that people argue this. People like us might argue it, but I'm sure most people don't care. Yeah. But people would argue whether or not Century Spice Road is a deck building game.
Yeah, and I think that would be a pretty divisive question if you ask
that's a good example as one that rides the edge there.
Yeah.
Whereas I consider it both. It's a hand management game in the sense that you have access to the whole deck, and it's more like I consider hand management where you have access to the deck, and it's more about the order that you're playing the cards in. But because you're still constructing that deck through the game, I think it's both.
Right. How about you, Brian? Do you have anything else for bonus round?
Again, I was just going to talk about those same things. We already kind of talked about also deck construction versus deck building, but I think that's a little more clear cut. And again, I think most CCGs and stuff like that fall into deck construction. The BGG definition also clarified that they consider that deck construction because it's the entire your deck is done before the game,
right?
Or not during gameplay or whatever.
One thing I wanted to bring up that I didn't list it at all here, and I think I should, is deck destruction with Flamme Rouge. Remember when we played Flamme Rouge?
Yes.
So it's not about building your deck; it's about playing the cards at the right time. Flamme Rouge is another racing game, but it's a bike racing game. But as you play cards from your deck, you're losing them. So that if as you go along further in the race, each card is considered like stamina or energy.
Right.
So if you use up all your early energy, at the end of the race, you have nothing left to to cross the finish line. So I think that's another game that's worth a mention, but it's the opposite. You're not building a deck. You are slowly whittling away at it to the game.
You know what? I thought of another example that I don't think I would consider it deck building, but when I'm talking about each individual element that we are using to determine a game that we used to play a lot, you actually got it for me, a physical copy for me.
Oh,
we used to play it a lot digitally.
Yeah.
Do you know which game I'm talking about? 2-player game.
2-player game that we played a lot?
We played digitally a lot.
I don't know. What
strictly 2-player game.
Oh.
And you purchased the physical copy for me.
I don't know.
Twilight Struggle.
Oh, that's right. Twilight Struggle.
So you don't construct the deck in the sense that you don't you don't draft any cards or purchase cards or whatever,
Mhm.
but there are cards that when you use them, they change hands.
Yeah.
And things like that. But again, I would consider that game a hand management game. I would not consider that one a deck construction.
Yeah.
A deck building game.
Yeah, I would consider. Yeah, I would agree with that opinion as well.
Yeah. But
oh man, it's been a while since we played that.
I mean, I guess you have no agency in when the cards change. Like it's the other player is spending a card and giving it to you kind of thing.
Yeah.
I that is up there. I mean, yeah, it has been a long time, but I really enjoyed our games. I feel like I think a bit like that is one of those ones where if you have played that game a lot if you have never played and you play against someone who plays that game, you're going to get destroyed because knowing what cards can come up and things like that, it makes a huge difference in that game.
Yeah. That one has a high learning curve, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure we'll talk about that one a lot whenever we get to our hand management or area control, I guess.
Yeah, that's
episode,
true.
whichever one comes first.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that wraps up our deck building episode of AP Table Talk. If you'd like to hear more content like this, please be sure to subscribe. You can also check out more of our content, projects, and other information about us at universityxp.com.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love it if you took some time to rate the show. We live to lift others with learning, so if you found this episode useful, consider sharing it with someone who could also benefit. Until next time, game on.